Hello friends and welcome, it's wonderful to have you here. I'm Morjax, we are looking at Mordheim, City of the Damned, and today I'm going to talk to you a bit about how I select my runes for my equipment. So, I've got the impressive, the Maiden of Sigmar for Sisters of Sigmar here, and gotta get something in my head. I'm just going to go through each of the equipment slots and tell you a little about my favorite runes and why I like them. So we're going to start with the head slot. And it doesn't matter what you pick here, it's kind of up to you. We're going to go to the enchanting page here. And the first one that I run, this is kind of my go-to, except for special cases. This is most of the time what I run. This is the Rune of Celerity, and it gives you an increased initiative, bumps you up by 10. So you can see we're at 45 to start off with. And I haven't assigned any of the skill points here, but okay, fine. But this just gives you a little boost, a little more likely to act sooner in the initiative ladder. And what that allows you to do is to, if you get a lot of guys at the top of the initiative ladder, you can act before they get a chance to. So that's kind of my go-to. One that I like for Skaven is right down here, the Rune of Courage. This increases the chance to pass all alone, fear, and terror tests by 20%. And Skaven don't really need the extra initiative, and they've got pretty bad leadership, so this is a good one for them. And particularly for the Rat Ogre, way down here, is the Rune of Lucidity. Increases the chance to pass stupidity tests by 50%. The Rat Ogre is pretty strong, except when he's stupid and can't do anything that round, so that can be a good thing to have if you have a Rat Ogre. So there's a bunch of really good runes for spellcasters actually on the head, and so we're gonna go up here, and the first one is the Rune of Focus. Now this is not one that you would use for Sisters of Sigmar, but one that you would use for any of the other warbands, and this reduces the chance to trigger a Chinch's Curse, which is basically like a backlash. Your caster has a chance to be damaged. So this is something for Skaven or human or possessed casters. The next one is the Rune of Concentration. And that's just a straight bump. It's a 10% bump to successfully cast your spells. So this one's okay. I like other ones better, but if you're having a hard time casting your spells, this might be a good one to have. Especially if your opponent has magic resistance, this can be a good one. Alright, the next one, we'll see if I can find it here, is the Rune of Innervation. I like this one a lot for casters. It can help you get the little extra juice each round. However, the asterisk with this is that the more you cast, the more likely you are to get cursed. So do be careful with how many times you cast each round. But this says, when casting a spell, receive a 30% chance to recover 1 offense point. So this can sometimes get you that 1 extra cast that you need each round, in addition to the active skill Introspection is the skill's name. I had a brain fart there. Next one up, and this is specifically for the Sisters, and that is the Rune of Piety. So this gives you a reduced chance to trigger Divine Wrath. So it's just the same thing as the, I think it was the Focus, that reduces your chance of your spells backfiring violently. And then the last one that's very good for casters is the Rune of Reach. This increases the range of spells by 6 meters, so this can really give you a leg up over just a standard ranged build, in that your spells can reach a very, very long way with this, and then there's also a passive skill, I believe, that increases the distance of your casts as well, so you can get some serious range on your casting. Okay, we're going to move on to our chest runes now, and honestly, this one's pretty short. I basically just pick whatever your main stat is, or your secondary stat. So one thing to be careful of is that all units have a max. You can see they've got a max of 20 on any particular skill, except for Impressives, which have a max of 25. So do be careful. The runes add 4 of each one, and there's a whole bunch of them. Let's see if I can find one that split 2 and 2 rather than 4 all into one. So basically just pick your primary or your secondary, or find the rune that has your primary and secondary and go with that one. And just be careful not to go over 20 for normal units or 25 for Impressives. All right, moving on to weapons. Now here, there's a lot of variation. I'm going to go through, a lot of it is very build specific. So one of them is the Rune of Havoc. This increases your chance to crit by 4%. And the complementary one here is the Rune of Carnage, which increases your crit damage by 20%. So if you're focusing on crits, those are probably the ones you want to run. Next up, we have Rune of Expertise, and there's one other complementary one, which is the Rune of Defiance. Now, this is really good for builds that have a large alpha strike. So my heavy melee Possessed build and my heavy melee Skaven build both hit very, very hard on an initial charge. So this Rune of Expertise gives you an extra hit chance, which is a really good thing when you're trying to make every hit count when you hit very, very hard. And let's pull up Defiance here. Alright, so here's Defiance. This increases the maximum range of charge and ambush actions by 2 meters. So it's kind of like the spellcasting one where you just get a little extra coverage. I'm not so hot on this one versus I'd usually go with Expertise. Reason being, only one attack per round can typically be a charge, unless you're doing fancy stuff like hit and run kind of tactics. So I tend to give this one a pass, but it's also good for heavy alpha strike characters. Next up, we've got the Rune of Misfortune. Now, I've got 3 runes in a row here that the more you run, the better they are. These are very synergistic and cumulative. So this first is the Rune of Misfortune, and this is what I ran with my Hand of 5 tournament build. It says, when dealing damage, reduce the target's critical hit resistance by 2% for 1 turn, and it is stackable. And so if you run this with everyone on your team, I would suggest running a one-handed weapon with a shield. Reason being, you can get 4 attacks per round at 2 red bubbles apiece, and so you can get this to stack 4 times with every one of your characters. So it's 8% for each if they attack 4 times, and then you've got 10 people in your warband, so you can see where that can basically totally demolish the enemy's critical hit resistance. So you can splash that with crit or chance or crit damage and start doing a lot of crits and hopefully some stuns. The next one, where more is better, is the Rune of Enfeeblement. It says, when dealing damage, receive a 25% chance to remove 1 offense point from the target. And this is, it's kind of a low chance at only 25%, 1 in 4. So if you have a one-handed weapon, you're only going to be removing 1 red bubble. However, you can imagine a case where if you're running this with all of your units or many of your units, you could basically remove most, if not all, of the red bubbles from a particularly scary enemy. That being said, if they have red bubbles, they're probably going to be spending it to counterattack you. So this one's definitely situational, and I'll leave it to your discretion when it makes sense to use it. And the last rune where more is better is the Rune of Venom. Now, this is almost exclusively pertaining to Skaven because they do a lot with poison damage, but it says when dealing damage, the target's poison resistance is reduced by 10% for 1 turn, stackable. So what you would want to do is run ideally all 5 of your heroes or many of your heroes with Weeping Blades, which are, they come pre-poisoned, and run a lot of items that are, you can poison your weapons with Skaven, and run this rune on your weapons, and you'll be able to start poisoning your enemy a lot. So that can get nasty real quick. Skaven has a lot of different ways that they can poison. Next up, we've got the Rune of Dismay, and this is something that I think goes really well with a psychology warband. So in particular, I'm thinking of the Cult of the Possessed. It says, when dealing damage, reduce the target's chance to pass all alone, fear, and terror tests by 10% for 1 turn, not stackable. So this is not quite as good because it doesn't stack, but it is particularly strong against Skaven, and this would be a good thing to run with your Impressive because they tend to have things like terror or fear, whatever it might be. So also a little bit situational. Not so good that it doesn't stack, but it has its uses. Okay, and now we have the weapon runes for spellcasters. You're going to either go for Rune of Spellbinding if you're running Human, Skaven, or Possessed, and that reduces the Chincha's Curse by 6%. Or you're going to be running Rune of Devotion if you're spellcasting with Sisters of Sigmar, which reduces your Divine Wrath chance by 6%. Now I should also say, real quick, with Sisters of Sigmar, if you're doing a caster build, run the Sigmarite Warhammer. It is so good. it gives you, each one gives you a 6% Divine Wrath reduction. So if you run 2 of these, they each give you a total, it'll give you 12% reduction. And then if you run the Rune of Devotion as well, it reduces it another 12%. So you get almost 25% reduction just from those 2 weapons and those 2 runes. So that's really good if you're trying to cast a lot of comets or whatever it might be. And the last one that I like for weapons, this is very, very specific. It is for a, well, I guess it's not so specific, but I think this is extremely synergistic with a parry build. Now, this is the Rune of Alacrity. It says, when receiving damage, receive a 25% chance to recover 1 OP, which is the red. So when you take damage, you've got a 25% chance to get 1 red bubble back, and that can be enough to counterattack. And that is a perfect segue into shields. The one that works very, very good with that is the Rune of Empowering. Whenever successfully parrying a melee attack, receive a 30% chance to gain 1 offense point, cannot exceed the maximum. So you can use up all your red, and there's a particular active skill called Web of Steel, which Web of Steel allows you to parry 3 times instead of 1 if you've mastered it. And so you can run the Rune of Alacrity on your weapon, you can run the Rune of Empowering on your shield, and you can run Web of Steel, which gives you 3 opportunities to parry. And I should also say that on the weapon, the Rune of Alacrity works quite well for, it also has a chance to roll, it's whenever you take damage, so it could be, I think it works for items like if you walk on a firebomb, don't walk on a firebomb, but if you're there anyway, I think that triggers it. Spell damage, range damage, so you just get better chance to get red, probably used for a counterattack, because by next round you'll refill all your red anyway. So, and then the last few that I like on the shields are, these are at your discretion really. 3 of them that are just sort of general purpose in my mind are the Rune of Health, which increases your health, of course it does. The Rune of Iron, which increases your armor absorption. This is a pretty nice one, especially if you're, I guess anytime. It's nice to beef up your armor absorption for non-Sisters of Sigmar. And if you're Sisters of Sigmar, you might be running a lot of heavy armor anyway, so it gets to be pretty ridiculous. Like if we switch our head to a helmet, and then we... so we've got a 50% damage reduction, and then we look at the iron as well. That's going to put it up to 60% armor absorption, which is pretty dang high. And then the other one is the Rune of Protection. And this is when successfully parrying a melee attack, gain a 10% chance to get a melee bonus for 1 turn, which is also stackable. So those are up to you whether you'd go with those. And then I've got 3 more here, which are also kind of situational. The first one is, let me see if I can find it, the Rune of Deflection. Now, this reduces your melee and ranged resistance each by... it increases your melee and ranged resistance each by 6%. Or, if you just need ranged resistance, you can go with the Rune of Deviation, which gives you 12% ranged resistance. Or, if you need melee resistance, go with the Rune of Shielding, and that's going to give you increased melee resistance by 12%. Now, there's a couple other that are really situational, like this gives you a bonus to all alone tests, or Rune of Steel is a critical hit resistance. They're okay, I guess, but I think I've already covered the ones that are my favorites. So if you've got a favorite rune that I didn't mention here, I'd love to hear which ones you like to use and what builds you use them for. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Do tune in next time for more Mordheim, City of the Damned.